Right, RF carburetor flow tight settings, and also while we're there, obviously a little bit of a clean. We'll start with the float bowls. I have a float bowl here which I've marked before I've taken them off. Each carburetor is marked 1, 2, 3 and 4, and that's on the carb body. And obviously before the bowls come off, I've marked this one float bowl 1, so that we can replace each item as it comes off to its respective and replace it back to its respective carburetor. It's just good practice. Certain components are different between carburetors 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, so 1 and 4 are in fact the same on the jets, but as I say, it's just good practice to replace each float bowl back to the carburetor it came from. Now I use carb cleaner, or you could use petrol, and just a little squirt inside to soak away. That's where all the debris collects, right where the drain valve is, right at the bottom. You can see all rusty muck down there. We'll leave that soaking while we're doing the flow tights. It's also worth noting here, it's worth cleaning a very fine rubber gasket. Have a good look at it. Obviously be looking for breakages or any debris or dirt or anything that's sat on top of the gasket. Make it in the way and stop it sealing properly when you return it. And the same with the float body. Actually on the carburetor, check the mating surface, making sure that you've removed all the rubbish, rust or whatever's in there that may get in the way of stopping this gasket resealing when it goes back on. As I say, each carburetor is marked 1, 2, 3 and 4, so there's each component comes off. I can put it into the relevant container so that 1 goes back onto 1. Right, that's the float bowls away. Now then, we've got 4 float valves situated within these plastic bodies. Now a tiny little grub screw. Make sure you've got the right screwdriver, it's really important. You get the wrong screwdriver size, you start making a mess of these tiny little screws. Take that off very gently, ease it out. I've taken carburetor 2 off, the little grub screws come off. Once that's off, you very gently, being careful not to disturb the floats, very gently, circular, gentle motion, pulling outwards, and there we go, that's the float out. And you'll see on the bottom, you've got a tiny little dome-shaped gauze. That's for cleaning the fluid, obviously before it goes into the fine needles and the fine jets of the carburetors, which would cause havoc. Also note you've got a little O-ring there. Make sure that's not been disturbed and is in place. Clean up obviously any debris on the filter and place that in the relevant bowl. Remove the other 3, and it's worth flushing out. And this is the supply of the fuel into the carburetor. Whatever you want to use, choke and carb cleaner or petrol, flush down, tipping the carbs downwards, flush out through those 2 holes, and then tipping these 2 downwards and flush down, and get rid of any debris that may be lurking in this channel which supplies all 4 carbs. Right, replace with a tiny little locating lug at the top. Again, don't disturb the float heights. Gently ease the float back into the body. You'll feel it as it pops back in. That's it. It'll become flush again with the surface of the carb. That's it. And obviously replace the little screw like that. There we go, that just holds that in place. Okay, right, in order to measure the floats correctly, we need to remove the starter jet. I've taken 3 of them out already. This is the last one, carburetor 2. Again, being very careful to use the right screwdriver, not a tiny little one. It needs to fit in there just nice and snug. Very gently take the starter out into bowl number 2, carburetor 2, and that's the starter jets moved. These are the main jets, and it's the main jet top surface to this surface of the float height, the float body, that we're actually measuring. Okay, to get the floats in exactly the right position, we need to get the carbs at the right angle. If the carbs are situated vertically, the weight of them will close the float valve, which is a tiny little spring-loaded pin on the nose, and that's them closed. Equally, if the carbs are tipped too far forward, they're swinging outwards like that, and they're out there under gravity. And what you find, if you get just the right angle as you tip the carburetors back, put that on an aerosol lid, and that I find is just the right height to allow the floats just to sit without compressing the spring. They're just sitting. The spring pressure will push them back out, and it's that location that you need to put the floats in order to set them correctly. Right, what I use for this job is a piece of plain square edge. It's actually totally flat, you can use whatever, and I've set this caliper set to 8mm, which is the height that I use. There we go. And that distance then is what we're checking. Place the wood, the gauge, across the flat surface looking downwards of the main jet, and you'll see the tip of my screw is just touching the edge of the float. There. Move along, obviously checking both floats to make sure that they're identical. There we go. That one wants a little adjusting, that wants a tiny little bit, and so on, and so you go down. The method of adjustment is on this. As you look downwards, you'll see a metal tang sticking down. It's got a little fine spring across it which pulls the float valve out. Be careful not to disturb that. And what you're looking to do is to adjust the metal tongue either up or down by gently pushing it down, or equally by bending it upwards, so that when the floats return you've then adjusted them up or down depending on which way you want to go. Obviously return back to your measuring device and make sure you've gone the right direction and that they are. That one's pretty smack on, so that's good, that's good. Right, obviously you need to return all the jets and starter jets back in. Make sure that all 4 screws are holding floats down nicely, and the final check is to make sure that in your adjustment that you haven't misaligned either one of the two floats. They can, if you're not careful, end up touching the body of the carb, so that as they travel up and down they're not impeded at all in their travel. This is really important. Check all 4 sets, of course. There we are, they're all nice and free. Once you're happy with the settings, check that your jets are in place, not too tight, and again the 4 grub screws not too tight, holding the floats nice and clean on the mating surface. Put the float bowls back to avoid disturbing them, knocking them, bending them out of place once you've finished all that adjustment.